Hey, bitches! Didn't expect to see me.
Hey, what's going on, Eggman? Some weird guy named the Glitch.
Sonic, I've had enough. You took my wife, you fucked my crops. I'm taking your life. And the Chaos Emeralds.
So here's the thing. That title is just for clicks. Spider-Man No Way Home, more like Spider-Man No Right Being This Good. I'm gonna be completely honest. I think this movie is very, 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 very good. But I don't think it's a masterpiece. And if I'm gonna talk about it, I need to talk spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to get spoiled, leave now. I'll give you a second. We good? Cool. I want to do that thing that I always do, talk about what I didn't love first and then talk about everything that I did love. This movie, from a visual and filmmaking standpoint, it is a step up from what's come before it in its series. However, that's not really saying much. Sure, the filmmaking has overall improved, the camera is placed with a lot more purpose, and they really hit all the best shots in the movie by not putting them in the trailers, but the movie overall still feels a little stiff to me. I am going to cut them some slack because of the fact that this was shot in a pandemic, but the criticism still applies. Aunt May's death, an emotional beat upon which the whole movie hinges, works for me, but to me at least, it just amplifies the MCU's Uncle Ben problem. Ben's death should be what teaches Peter the lesson that will forever define Spider-Man, and the fact that May's death is what must teach him the lesson just means that when Ben died in this universe, if Ben died in this universe, it didn't much matter. And my biggest complaint, Sandman and Lizard, two villains that I find really compelling. Because of those filming restrictions, they don't have anything to do, absolutely none of the depth that made them so compelling, and none of the complexity that would make these characters so engaging when interacting with their respective Spider-Men. But other than that, that's really all I dislike. And everything else is amazing. Villains. While I mentioned my disdain for Sandman and Lizard, the other three are amazingly well executed. Electro receives a much-needed upgrade that ends in a bit of a mixed bag, honestly. I somewhat like what The Amazing Spider-Man 2 sets up for its version of Max Dillon. I just hate everything that happens after he becomes Electro, particularly his design. I don't like Blue Electro. So, in a way, I kind of miss the nerd, the nobody in the crowd that TASM 2 presents, but in terms of visuals and menace, I vastly prefer what No Way Home does with the character. Hell, even in terms of what he does in the action scenes, I prefer this iteration of Electro, even if he does veer a little bit closer to just being Jamie Foxx rather than feeling like Max Dillon. Doc Ock is handled fairly well. As one of the only villains who end their original movie being truly good, it's smart to pull him before that climactic scene where he has a change of heart, and smarter to have his fix come the earliest and then stick to that fix. I was genuinely concerned that they would undo his redemption just to have Ock show up as a villain in the final battle, but having him show up and then help the Spideys, kind of acting as an homage to Superior Spider-Man, was the smartest thing they could have done. And Goblin, man, the Green Goblin in this movie, Willem Dafoe returning to the role that he was born to play, no mask, just his sincerest, creepiest expressions and elation at ruining Spider-Man's life. And honestly, the Goblin's philosophy remains intact going from that first movie into this one. The idea that as hard as Peter tries, he will end up resented by the world for just trying to do the right thing. And his idea that great power beckons irresponsibility. And great power has never been contextualized like this before, even in Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse told us that every Spidey suffers, every Spidey loses, and that at the end of the day, the loss isn't what matters, it's whether or not you get back up. And while Spider-Verse told us this, No Way Home shows us this by taking a Peter Parker at his lowest point and making him work with two other Spideys who have gone through it, who we've seen go through it, and having them literally say, I know what you're going through, and it's going to be okay. And they brilliantly show us just enough of Peter 2 and 3 that you understand where they've been without elaborating on their stories too much. We don't hear about any crazy villains they fought since we last left them, or much of what they've done with their lives, but we learn what makes them relevant to the story of this Peter Parker. Also, I'm genuinely impressed that by the logic of the MCU's multiverse, Toby and Andrew are variants of Tom, which insinuates that Tom is like the one true Spider-Man, and Twitter hasn't figured this out yet. So if I start something for pointing this out, I'm sorry. Anyways, we learn how Andrew, in the face of Gwen's death, became bitter and rageful, and Toby expresses a similar sentiment that we actually got to see in Spider-Man 1, stating that Tom needs to be better. And Tom hears this, he learns these most important lessons that he'll carry into his future as Spider-Man, symbolized by his new suit that features a logo inspired by his multiversal counterparts. And both of these Spider-Men and all of these villains and this whole multiverse conundrum add up to what this movie truly brings to the table for this iteration of Spider-Man. Action, consequence. This is what defines the Spider-Man character. Action, you want to be selfish because the world doesn't treat you fairly. Consequence, you lose the one person that did. Action, you take the easy path to help your friends and kinda yourself. Consequence, you suffer the consequences of every other version of yourself. And while I don't feel much like the previous two films are entirely devoid of consequences and personal stakes in the way that some of my contemporaries do, I love how this movie is nothing but Peter facing consequence after consequence and even taking them on himself so that others don't have to suffer. Action, you save these villains from death and try and cure them. Consequence, they beat you half to death and kill the only family you have left. And what's more important than making Peter's life suck is how they focus on the fact that even though Peter is miserable, he still focuses on doing the right thing. Yeah, he can send everyone home to die, but he chooses not to, and he makes sure that they know that. And even in the end, he goes out of his way working with the other Peters to cure them. And sure, in the end, he still tries to kill Goblin, but even after Norman tries killing Peter, he still chooses to save Norman rather than kill the Goblin. And the escalation in this movie is insane, going from this personal story about Peter's life being screwed up because of Mysterio revealing his identity to this multiversal epic that ends in the Statue of Liberty getting fucked up and the entire multiverse getting ready to come kick Peter's ass. And again, all this is Peter's fault. Maybe Goblin's just being a dick when he says that May's death is all on Peter, but the idea of what he's saying is kind of fair. So I guess what I'm saying is, action. You want to have a normal life. You want to be the hero that everyone loves and the man who can love. Consequence, no matter how hard you try, you can't have it all.
With great power comes great responsibility. This is my gift, my curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
Special thanks to my friends Omar and Taryn for donating to the $10 tier on my Patreon.